The following feature presentation is part of the Skywalking Network.
Hello and welcome to Star Warsologies, a podcast about science and other academic fields of study seen in Star Wars. I'm Melissa Miller, one of the co-hosts, and along with James Floyd, we were recently in Tokyo for Star Wars Celebration. This episode is a bonus and one of our panel recordings from that convention. James ran a great panel called Droids, AI, and Sentience. Enjoy!
So we'll just go down the line here and introduce yourselves.
All right, just make sure this mic works. Great. Now, before I start, I just have to say I have a bad feeling about this. I always want to say that at a Star Wars celebration. Bucket list I crossed off. Thank you very much. My name is Joel Welch. I've had quite the life. I'm a retired federal police officer from Canada. I was in the RCMP for many years doing federal policing. Along the way, I became a lawyer. And I took basically early retirement, went back to university to try to become a law professor. So I'm working on a doctorate, a PhD in law. Now this is relevant because I'm in my dissertation, which is a 300-page document you have to defend on a board of examiners. I had it here a couple years ago, and not anymore. I'm using science fiction to explore emerging technologies, how they can inform policymakers, so we don't get, hit the pitfalls or the traps that science fiction folks like Star Wars and Lucasfilm have said, hey, this might be a bad idea. I'm looking for insights, so I'm really happy to be here. And I'm living my best life right now.
Good afternoon. My name is Yukie Nagai. I am a project professor at the University of Tokyo. And I studied robotics at the university. We have been developing their intelligent robot which can learn like human babies and also interact with their human partners. And I have to say that I'm not a specialist in the Star Wars, but I'm a specialist in the robotics. And I'm sure that after receiving the invitation to this panel, I started learning about their androids in the Star Wars. I found it's very, very inspiring. Not only interesting, but very inspiring for the robotics researchers. So I should recommend the other robotics researchers to watch it. Just enjoying the story. And so I'm very much looking forward to the discussion today. And let me give the brief introduction in Japanese as well. So 東京大学で、ロボットの研究をしております永井圭と申します。私もロボティクスの専門なので技術的なこのお話はできると思うんですけれども、少しスター・ウォーズは最近勉強したばかりなので、でも今日のディスカッション非常に楽しみにしております。よろしくお願いいたします。
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Chris Kempshall. I'm a historian. I'm very delighted to be here. So to give you a bit of background, I'm obviously in the Science Technology. This is the 6th or 7th thing I've done over the last 3 days. It's the last one I have to do. My voice is clinging on for dear life at the end of it. I think there's some kind of recognisable faces from some of the things I've been doing earlier on. So my historical background is, by and large, I'm a First World War historian, and from that I've kind of branched out into other things like the portrayal of history in computer games, and then the portrayal of history and politics in the Star Wars franchise, and that's kind of my civilian life on one side, and then on the other side is because of some of the weird route that I took through for those things. I've now contributed various kind of official writing work for Lucasfilm. So I co-authored a book called Battles That Changed the Galaxy, which was an in-universe military history of the Star Wars universe. And then more recently, it came out last year, was a book called The Rise and Fall of the Galactic Empire, which is I like it when people go, woo. I was on the live stage yesterday, and there were 2 small groups of what I'm going to assume were geeky history nerds, who both wooed separately at the same time. It's like, my people have come. And Rise and Fall is an in-universe kind of history book about the Galactic Empire and its aftermath. And this is the second one of these I've done with James back in London. It must have been London. Where we did something about rebels, resistance, but not necessarily those words in that order.
Yes.
Yes.
So the first part we're going to talk about is droids and their physical components. So what makes a robot and what makes a droid kind of that tell us about the physical parts of robotics.
First of all, I know there's working on the design part of the robot, but then I found that there are design of their droids in the Star Wars is very, very nice. And I found that we should discuss this point in there two different aspects. One is the mobility, the motor capabilities of the robot, and the second one is more like an interaction parts, how the robot can utilize the body to interact with the other agencies. And in terms of their embodied mobilities and also the motor capabilities, I think there are droids in the Star Wars has a really limited. I learned that the very first story in the Star Wars started almost 50 years ago. So at that time, it might be there, for example, their C-3PO or R2-D2 had the very, very high technologies at that moment. But now if I compare our current technologies in the world and also the robots in their Star Wars story, I have to say that our real-world technology is much, much better in many ways. For example, the motor capabilities, the movement capabilities. Some of you may know that the Boston Dynamics, the robots, the humanoid robots, which can learning and also the jumping and also the even flipping and dancing. So it has a very good super motor capabilities, which is also much nicer than the humans. So in terms of such mobilities, like human-like mobilities, I think that our current technologies already go beyond the technologies in the Star Wars. And also in terms of the interaction part, how the robot can utilize the embodiment for interacting with the others. Again, there we have a very, very, very nice, human-like faces, which will look like humans. If you just first look at it, you cannot really distinguish real humans and their android. And then we utilize soft materials, especially for creating biologically inspired mechanisms. So I think that both the motor part and also the social aspects that embodied technologies is now much advanced in the real world compared to Star Wars.
Yeah, I think that the Boston Dynamics robots can do all these crazy things physically, but basically C-3PO is limited to all the crazy things that Anthony Daniels can do. So maybe that's why he can't flip. But with the magic of computer graphics, maybe we'll see that sometime.
So I'm going to need a volunteer for someone to go and tell Chopper that he's obsolete. If you could let us know how you get on.
Yeah, one more thing. So although I said that there are both the motor and the social parts of this embodied, the technology is already very good in the real world, but there is still the one big challenge which we have not achieved yet, but already achieved in the Star Wars. That is the integrations that all function together. So although we have very, very nice technology, very nice embodied robot in our research communities, but each robot has its own specific field. Like in a Boston Dynamics robot can do their very nice dancing or motor movement, but not their interaction part. Androids, especially for example in Japan, their professor at the Osaka University, the Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro, has developed the copy of himself. It really looks like a Professor Ishiguro. So the appearance is very nice. It has a very nice social communication abilities, but it cannot walk along, or it cannot jump, it cannot dance. So our current technologies has very, very nice ability or advanced technologies in each direction. But then it's very challenging for us to all integrate all together. The limitation or challenge is that because the size of the body is limited, so we cannot put so many motors or actuators inside of this size of the body. We always have the very big motor machines behind the robot and then control it. So that having the one entity which contain all together, all function is a very big challenges for us to achieve.
So is that the professor that you mentioned that made an exact copy of himself in robot form, which is totally not creepy? But is that the one that is at World Expo?
Yes. It will be in the Osaka Expo. If you have time, I strongly recommend that you should visit there.
So go check that out since you're in Japan. Or if you already live in Japan, go check it out anyway.
Just to ask Yukie on that, is there a kind of a tension between designing a robot or an android that is functional, it doesn't matter what it looks like, it does the job, versus making it look like a real thing, a kind of humanizing of it, so it doesn't look creepy, it's a weird thing of arms. How do designers go about those kind of, because there's no really easy way of making those 2 points match, of making something that's super functional and looks aesthetically acceptable and pleasing to a human.
We have a very important and interesting discussion, which is called uncanny valley. So if you think about like two-dimensional spaces, one is that corresponding to like similarity or closeness to the real human or real animals, and also the familiarity in the y-axis. And usually that if the robot has more human-like or animal-like appearance, the familiarity gradually increases. You can compare, for example, the arm robot, which do the manipulation in the companies manufacturing their automations. And then if you have a more like a human-like robot, you have that higher familiarity for the more human-like robot. But then it suddenly drops to the uncanny, which is called uncanny valley. If the robot get very, very close to the human, but have some differences from the real human. Of course, if you carefully look at the android, you can observe it's not the real human, and then your familiarity drastically drops. But then, of course, if we can't have a real human, the familiarity should go up again. So we have the challenge to go beyond this uncanny valley. How we can make such a very, very familiar artificial agent which really look like the humans. Or, for example, there you can see the picture there. This is our robot, which is from Italian Institute of Technologies, which have the machine-like appearance, but it really looks nice and it's very cute. We really like to utilize it for the social interaction study. So I think this does not go to the uncanny valley yet. It has a more machine-like appearances. So we try to understand why this uncanny valley happens and how we can really go beyond this uncanny valley.
Do you want to tell us more about the robots you use in your robotics lab and what you're using them for?
Besides this robot, we also have there more, the bigger ones, which are very good at manipulating the objects. So we separate their research directions. We are focusing more on the social directions or more like motor learning directions.
I have a question. Forgive me, I am the non-scientist probably on this panel, plus a historian.
Oh, wait.
My undergraduate degree's in history, so that's great. We can talk about the First World War anytime we want to. When folks, researchers like yourself, go and develop these robots, is there any input from psychologists or sociologists how humans will react to this new technology, and if it's positive or negative or somewhere in between?
Yeah, in their human-robot interaction, the research community, many sociologists are working together with the robotics researchers, and they are interested in how well the people can accept the different types of robot, different appearance, different size, and so on. For example, a man-like robot is more accepted in a more manufactured environment. Like a female appearance robot are better accepted in a social environment. So we also utilizes our experiences in our daily life, and then we also have predictions about the appearance of the robot. What kind of appearance is better accepted?
That's interesting. So I would think like a killer robot, like that IG-88, IG-11 from Star Wars is probably not cuddly, and it's your kid at home.
Yeah, let's move on to the other end of the spectrum. We've talked about the physicality of robots and the challenges of making them look more like people. And Now let's talk a little bit more about the inside the brain of the robots. In Star Wars, we have a lot of kind of different scales of intelligence. We have here like a power droid, which basically is a walking battery. It can kind of just follow directions of gonk and plug in and gonk and gonk. Battle droids, which are the real heroes of Star Wars. I'll get to this.
Roger.
They have limited intelligence, but they're self-aware. They know that they have limited intelligence. And then we have these medical droids and other things that are super smart and make lots of decisions, maybe even better than organic sentience would. What do we know about programming, the learning and adaptation in just artificial intelligence? Like how do we teach them to learn and adapt and evolve?
One of the things I find interesting about droids as a group in Star Wars and the way that we think about the various levels of intelligence, because clearly some of them are smarter than others, and that's a programming choice through the Trade Federation or QAP Drive Yards or whoever's manufacturing the thing. And there's a couple of interesting aspects to that. Is that I wonder whether or not in universe, because in universe when they talk about droids, they talk about a collective, all robotic things. And at times it feels a little bit to me like just talking about mammals or fish. And there's a lot of difference between a rabbit and a gorilla in regards, or a chimpanzee in regards to intelligence, but yet all of them get rolled in together as a single collected, not human, not kind of organic life thing. And on the previous slide, we saw a goblin droid, and look at that beautiful boy, look at that beautiful boy. Clearly not designed to be as intelligent as a battle droid, which is not necessarily particularly intelligent to begin with. So I find it interesting that it seems that all of these things get lumped together as if there is something similar between them, beyond the fact that they are just metal things that move around and do stuff. If whether or not, in universe there's a movement to actually kind of sub-categorize the varying levels of automated being, so that we can recognise that there are differentiations in the intelligence levels of gonk droids versus medical droids who are programmed to be surgeons. But also what it tells us about kind of the military thought process behind why you would make a robot that dumb. Beyond the fact that probably there must be some kind of monetary thing, to make them smarter costs more. In the same way that, reproducing AK-47s in the modern world, it's a real simple thing. There's not a lot that can go wrong with it. It's not the best rifle you'll ever find. In the same way, that's not the best droid you'll ever find or the best soldier you'll ever find. But it's the easiest to make and it's the easiest to maintain. So that kind of production versus categorization thing is always really interesting for me when you look at droids in Star Wars.
Yeah, I think one of the things with the kind of the tiers of intelligence in the droid in Star Wars is basically the more humanish or the more like a person they look, the smarter they get. Yeah. I wonder if that stems from how we would react to it psychologically, that we don't want a super smart box, that it would just kind of freak us out. I don't know. Do you think that humans would accept a super smart box, or they wanted their box to be dumb, but they're more human-shaped things to be smart?
Yeah, their appearance has they have a great impact on our expectations. But nowadays we also use by the ChatGPT. It doesn't have a clear appearance. It's just an interface. But we learn that it knows a lot. So that although Bernstein droids has a physical entity, the shape of this physical, the body, has a great impact on our expectation. But then if we don't see that such a physical, the appearances, maybe we could expect that AI in general could have a very, very sophisticated knowledge and also the communication abilities, which is also amazing a lot.
That is very true, because we're used to using our phones to chat with people or text or use I'm going to age myself here with IRC, but just online chat systems. And so that we're used to talking to people and not seeing them. It's completely anonymous. And so we've talked to ChatGPT and other intelligent agents that we're used to already talking to the screen or typing it in. So let's talk about different applications of AI in real life. That we just talked about ChatGPT, but what else is there?
Well, I think with AI, and I'm going to get into this. I'm the lawyer, and I spend most of my life, thinking very, very long about the extremes of at least human behavior. But with AI, of course, you can use it for good or you can use it for bad. Let's sell some applications. Well, I just checked my train station in Osaka using an AI app through Google. They're around that, it's resource based. But we have these large language models which are getting better and better, but it's not a Google search, it's different. Other applications in real life, I think anything that requires large data sets, things that our human brains cannot process effectively. I think AI is wide open to advance exponentially than any technologies. You see that in astronomy, you can see that in healthcare, you can see this in even material supplies, material sciences, which is key for technological development. But it cuts both ways. I think towards the end of this panel, we'll be talking some of the bad things that AI can do in real life.
Yeah, may I come there? Yeah, I have more like a discussion point in the AI because for example, in the case of ChatGPT or any other AI, there are many people focus first of all on their knowledge, how much knowledge it has. Of course, the knowledge is a very important point for our intelligence. But then there are another important aspect is the learning and also the curiosity for learning. Whether the robot has the curiosity or motivation to learn something new. That is a very most important point, and also their function which distinguishes between their current machine learning or the robotic learning and the human learning. For example, that if you have the small babies, you observe that the babies are exploring many things in the world. For example, if you put many toys on the floor, the babies never give up to exploring how they can play with the toys. They sometimes put the toys in their mouths to know whether it tastes or not, and also sometimes even they put their hands and their legs into their mouths because they want to learn whether their body has some smells or taste and whether they can feel something when they touch their own bodies. This curiosity and motivation is really important for this AI and next stage of the AI because we have now so many machine learning techniques in our research communities, but the one missing point is the motivation the machine should have to know or to decide what to learn next, what to know, what to explore next. For example, I guess that many of you start interested in Star Wars in your childhood. So even though you have never asked to learn something about Star Wars, you got a very strong curiosity. That's why you learned a lot about the story of the Star Wars. Maybe you know many names of the different droids. Actually, to me that I know only the R2D2 and C3PO. This is my knowledge. But now my curiosity is really, really increasing in these days. But my original curiosity was very limited in the Star Wars, but then by knowing something, my curiosity increases. And then I also started exploring what happens in other androids, whether they also have the curiosity or not. And I found that there are R2D2 and the C3PO have the curiosity in exploring the environment. If they found something new which they don't know, they say, oh, what is this? Or whether they can interact with it and so on. So this curiosity is very, very nice, and especially that only in some limited android have also in the Star Wars. This is also a very interesting point, because if all androids in the Star Wars story have this curiosity, then they cannot have like a military droids or surgical robots, because they also start exploring many other things. So that is a very intelligent design by the George Lucas, that they also limited such a curiosity part in some, only a few robots, and then some other don't have such so much curiosity, and then they can focus on a specific task.
Yeah, that specific task, they talk about programming, so that limits them to their programming is they're just that single function, and so that they don't necessarily have that extra level that AI has, that curiosity, wanting to learn, wanting to be more than area it originally started. So that's really interesting, and that curiosity is something, of course, like you mentioned with children, is something that's very human. And so, kind of, let's talk about what sentience is. And kind of here we have a couple things that are examples of different types of sentience, different levels. But what does it mean to be sentient?
I'll start. First thing, I think you have to be a Star Wars fan. I say that only with half jest because it's hard to determine what is sentient. It's extremely difficult. It's what is life, biological life. As a lawyer, I think of these things. What degree of life gives rise to legal protections and rights and obligations, which is going to be what we'll be talking about in a few minutes. But right now, what is sentient? Well, I think you have to tell a good story. But ChatGPT can do that. There's AI out there who can tell stories, whether they're good or not. That's up for debate, of course. But it's the emotional intelligence, a good story that you get a visceral reaction to it, an emotional reaction to it. Can a machine do that? Can programming do that? Or are they just mimicking the intentions of the programmers? I think that's why it's so difficult to determine what is sentient. And just a few history. So the term artificial intelligence was coined in 1956. Many people in the field, from my understanding, do not like the term artificial intelligence because it's very limited. Does ChatGPT or if you're online, do bots on social media, do they pass the Turing test? I think we're getting very close to it. I think if I have an AI that tells me a story where I cry, or where I find inspiration, or I feel I have a visceral emotional reaction to it, I think that's getting more close to what is sentient.
Do you want to explain the Turing test and just what that is?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Very generally, it's when a computer, AI can pass itself off as human without the human knowing.
There's some people I think I know that may not pass the Turing test.
I think, because Joel's right, trying to define sentience is water through your hands. It's really, really, really hard. And I've heard some people say it's about self-awareness and identification of the self. But I've got friends whose dogs are clearly self-aware. They know they interact with the world. They know their own size. They know their own space in it. But I wouldn't necessarily call them sentient. But then I've seen animals that are clearly dreaming, and that's an extra level of kind of mental capacity as well. And when it comes to how we then look at various kind of species and droids in the Star Wars world, the issue of sentience has really interesting and kind of dramatic, but also potentially serious or creepy repercussions for the things that we see on screen, or the things that we see in kind of the additional literature around Star Wars. So we've got a Borg on the screen. Chewbacca eats one of those in front of apparently its grieving widow in The Last Jedi, but also it's kind of an alien puffin. So are puffins sentient? He's clear that if you watch The Last Jedi, that bird was clearly aware enough of its own relationship with the bird that was being eaten to be upset about it. It feels like a test of sentience in that sense. And when you see kind of aliens being, and again, it's something we're going to talk on shortly, kind of forced labour of aliens, or forced labour of droids, or the way in which particular species or robots are used potentially against their will, despite the fact that they may never have been asked about their will, is really, really interesting in Star Wars. And at the risk of crossing the geeky streams, I'm basically kind of drawn very much back to the Star Trek Next Generation episode, The Measure of a Man, which is, again, one of the finest 40 minutes of science fiction television that's ever existed, which is about Data trying to justify his sentience, to take the step from being a robot product, effectively, to being a being with rights. And it's interesting how and where the discussions and debates have and have not appeared to have happened within Star Wars.
So he mentioned the Star Trek episode, The Measure for a Man, so if you have a drink, please drink it up. Okay.
Yeah.
By the way, it's like bingo, folks. I'm going to be doing some philosophy here because, what is life? What is the meaning of life? We know the answer is 418. What's the questions, right? So, how do you find sentience? Do you have to be self-aware? Do you have to be self-aware of your own mortality? That you know you're going to die one day, become all stardust. Yeah, this is really happy talk, I know. But, it's this existential dread. That's really important because humans have been trying to figure this out for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. What does this all mean? Are we just in a video game that has no meaning? I hope not. Unless Lucasfilm holds the copyright in the video game. It's the existential dread question. Is it more than that? And that leads into this notion of determinism versus free will. If you believe in free will, the droids are free will, then perhaps that's sentient, and that gives rise to a certain degree of legal rights within certain categories or classes of droids within Star Wars. But if it's just determinism, then who cares? Literally, what's the ethics behind that? I'm not an ethics professor or ethics philosopher, but I do think what he sees from a legal perspective is quite interesting.
Yeah, also for me, sentience is the most interesting but very challenging topic to discuss. Actually, the James gave the Japanese word there is kankaku, but kankaku is much lower things.
Oh, really?
Sorry that I didn't mention before. But for Japanese, the kankaku is just like a visual sense or like an audio sense. Just I see, I hear, not so much about like an awareness or like feeling, like emotional things. So we have to. I actually don't know the corresponding Japanese word to the sentience. I never use this term in my paper, so journal paper. So it can be a very interesting, new challenges for us to also address.
I gotta say that Google Translate, I had to keep searching through to find a word that I thought fit that had multiple meanings, and I was like, so I picked kankaku. And
basement.
Basement. All right, so that's just like sense.
Sense.
So, but yeah, and so it's just. I mean, even that idea of itself of what is this word? When we have a word for it. I remember a fantasy series I read many years ago, and one of the characters who's some sort of fantastic being, like a centaur or something, asked if it had a soul, and the answer to that eventually came out was, if you are worried if you have a soul, then you have a soul. And that's, just kind of, it's a little bit circular, but at the same time that there's some sort of level that you're reaching in. And, your question of do you need free will or do you need existential dread? And those are things that make, human sentience, but why are we limiting ourselves to human ideals for what sentience would be?
I think, therefore, I Am, which is Randy Descartes in his first book, first booklet. Yeah, computers do think, so they are going that. Now, if you study philosophy, any argument, any presumption, you can deconstruct that as always counter-arguments. Even that notion that free will, perhaps we're just being tricked by a trickster, which is or a demon in a box, so to speak.
Are there any Red Dwarf fans in the audience? Oh, a couple of hands. So it's a British science fiction comedy show, and it has droids in it, and the droids have been programmed to believe in what is referred to as silicon heaven. is that where droids will serve humans, and when they die, they will go to silicon heaven. And the thing that is often kind of brought up for one of the characters who's kind of one of the droids who's trying to achieve more humanness is, well, of course I believe in silicon heaven. If there was no silicon heaven, where would all the calculators go? That idea that there must be something more for droids, but all of the humans look at it in a sense of, well, this is clearly a really cynical thing to enslave these people. But in that sense, can their droids be religious? In that sense, if it's something that's programmed, can they have that kind of level of spirituality?
Well, in Futurama, you mentioned the Silicon Heaven. In Futurama, there is robot hell,
yeah,
and there is a robot religion, and back in the EU, the Forlom, the bounty hunter, has these visions, and one of them is Forlom kind of essentially becoming a Jedi or something, and so it's like, doesn't have faith in that, and that's a big question. So. Reason I called out battle droids before, if you've seen Lego Star Wars, the Freemaker adventures, there's this character Roger. Who's a Freemaker fan? All right, we got one. We got two in the back. We got some in the back. Awesome. If you haven't seen it, definitely see it. But also in Clone Wars, we see these battle droids that have been reprogrammed to work for the Republic, and R2-D2 is assigned to watch them. And so we think, the battle droids are stupid, they're comical. They're definitely comical. But I think that, and they know they're not very good. And I think that's psychologically the part of the Neomodians is that they are worried about controlling the robots. That's why there's a master control signal in the droid control ship in Phantom Menace, is that they don't want droids that are smarter than them or droids that will overthrow them. And so it's like, we need a kill switch that shuts them all off. In the Clone Wars, they decide, oh, that was a bad idea. But you hear, like, in even one of the first episodes of Clone Wars, there's this battle droid that's driving a tank, and he gets hit, and he's about to die, and he's like, but I just got promoted! And, it's a comic line, but think about, like, what you need to have in your head to make that kind of joke, and realize that droids get promoted, which means their experience ranks them up. And, if you're just programming droids, why wouldn't you just program ones that are a higher rank? Like we have the tactical droids. But the sense that your experience moves you up is really deep. And then when we get to the R2's droids, his squad, at the very end, that they get left behind to be the rear guard to defend the organics escaping. And they turn to R2 and say, it's been an honor to serve you. So where do droids get a sense of honor? And that is like serious, like, they're just comical throwaway droids. But no, they are really deep. And then I just want to point out, Roger, one thing, is that he makes sweet, sweet sand cookies, but he's a battle droid, but he's been programmed differently to be a kid's kind of mentor and best friend and babysitter. But he takes that upon himself to do these extra things, like bake. He's not very good at baking, but oh wow.
I think, I wonder, I should say, what Sigmund Freud was thinking. Do droids need to have an ego to have sentience? I watch a lot of cat videos, okay? So the cats actually have some egos, but, does it raise the level of sentience? Yeah, I don't know.
I would say that the self-awareness may be close to the ego, and the self-awareness seems to be the part of the sentience. And actually, we also, in the research community, we also try to develop such a kind of hierarchical representation of the intelligences. So the lower level is very kind of signal level, like visual signal, audio signals, and then by integrating them together, for example, I can recognize this is not just a green, some texture, but it's a total of the tea. And then I can also imagine that how I feel if I drink it. So based on my personal experiences, I can make a prediction about the world, and this can accumulating this kind of knowledge from the low level, and then to make a more higher level, like an abstract representation of our sensory motor experiences, should allow us to acquire more like a real or symbolic representation of our experiences. But still, an open challenge is that the self-awareness or consciousness or free will, we never achieve such a free will design in the world. We still struggling with it.
we can become our own gods, right? And nothing bad happens when that happens.
Yeah. Maybe the one the key idea is that the robot should also have life. Robot needs to survive to have its own life. Currently, that we just switch on or switch off our robot, so robot doesn't care when it is switched on or on. So it doesn't have any life experiences, no episodic memories about its own experiences. But once the robot has its own longer history of their experiences, maybe they start also acquiring in much higher level of the representations because they want to survive and they also want to receive more better feedbacks. So that would be the motivation to have self-awareness, because without self-awareness, it's very hard also for us to survive in the world. There are actually some disorders, developmental disorders, and also the psychiatric disorders who struggle with the loss of such a self-awareness. They sometimes feel as if they are controlled by someone. They completely lose their own control. They can move, they can walk along, but they feel as if they are controlled by someone. Of course, no one is controlling them, but they are losing such self-awareness or free will. So by comparing such psychiatric disorders, robotics, and many other different technologies, we also try to understand what is a free will, where it comes, and why even people can lose the free will.
Wow, I've never heard of these. That's really interesting. That humans that don't have their own self-awareness, essentially. And I mean, but at some point, are they right and we're wrong? Because we're just a bunch of chemical and electrical impulses that are just randomly firing. And a lot of times we do things and then justify them later when our brain finally catches up. But
I don't know, have you seen me on a Friday night at the bars?
No, but I have gotten your drunk emails.
That's true.
One thing in Star Wars is obviously our best friends in Star Wars, like the droids we see here on the screen. They exhibit whether they're acting like humans or they act like R2-D2 and BB-8 and Chopper are all essentially like house pets that they're useful. They have moods, they have emotions, they remember a lot. And, as Dave Filoni has put it, if R2-D2 is the family dog, Chopper is the house cat that, clearly thinks it's better than you and will probably murder you in your sleep. But, why do you think that, these droids specifically are higher up, even though they don't necessarily, look human, but, maybe that's a thing of sentience that's very, very human, is the need for social contact, or wanting to have friends, and maybe that's part of that curiosity.
I think in regards to that comment of them being pets, I think it's actually partly the answer to it, in the way that people tend to keep cats and dogs and don't tend to keep squirrels. That actually the reason why they're viewed as being better and higher is because of their relationship with humans. How they are programmed to relate to humans, or how humans react to them, rather than, I know lots of people who keep rats as pets, but I know equally a lot of people who go, oh, well, no, that sounds awful. And therefore, they are not viewed as being as good a pet as a cat or a dog because of our emotional response to them, rather than anything. Again, they're still just a mammal. In that sense, there's nothing intrinsically different between a rat's biology and a cat's biology, except for kind of cross-species thing. They're both small animals, and yet one, because of our human eyes, the way that we interact with them, is viewed as being a better pet, and therefore a more accomplished animal.
Well, on Lothal, that there's loth cats and loth rats.
Yeah.
So basically, they're all, you just put loth in front of it, and they're all the same thing.
It's all up for grabs.
And so let's talk about kind of how they interact in society. One of the first things we see in A New Hope is restraining bolts put on R2-D2 and C-3PO, and Luke, basically hey, I'm turning you on, I'm turning you off. is that right? We've already got an opinion here. No,
it's not. An additional aspect, there is training involved, so obviously a kind of a very easy reference point, kind of the slave collars in that sense. But the example that I always actually go to is not a restraining role. It's in The Empire Strikes Back when it's a moment of high tension, they're in the asteroid belt, and C-3PO is whittering away in the background because that's what C-3PO does, and Leia turns him off, which is the equivalent of punching a human companion into unconsciousness because they're being annoying. And Han Solo's reaction is not, you're a psychopath, it's thank you, because you turned him off.
We wouldn't treat a human that way. You wouldn't do that, but at the same time, it's like, well, I can turn my Roomba off and I don't feel bad about it. I can turn my Alexa off and I don't feel bad about it. I might, still maybe tell her nicely that because when the robot revolution happens, I want to be not high up on their kill list. But yeah, there's that level of when do we give them that respect of life?
In the books, the Star Wars Archives books, which are like all behind the scenes stuff and lots of interviews with George Lucas, I can't immediately remember who the author is because I'm very tired. But for the one for Revenge of the Sith, George Lucas talks about Bail Organa, basically, take on C-3PO and R2-D2, have protocol droids, not incorrect. And George Lucas explains that Bail Organa says that because he views C-3PO as essentially being the same as a bin. He's just a piece of domestic appliance. He's a washing machine. And therefore you can wipe the memory of your washing machine without feeling any moral compunction over it. Which is a really interesting thing that for what is effectively the last film of George Lucas' Star Wars, that films that are designed for us to see through the eyes of C-3PO and R2-D2. That one of the main kind of heroes of that prequel trilogy treats the droids like it's a Hoover. And there's been no progression. In fact, it's kind of a regression in that sense. I find it really, really interesting.
I just remember an interesting story here in Japan. There, several years ago, many years ago, there we had the dog lord Aibo, produced by Sony. And many people started playing with their eyeballs, and some accepted eyeball as a part of the family. That's very close to pet. And as a robotics, I can easily turn on and turn off my eyeball, but some don't like it. Some really want to take care of their eyeballs as their own family. And then, for example, of course, the eyeball also gets older. Some moment at the moment, some of their eyeballs are already local. Then they also have organized a funeral for the eyeballs. So, although everyone knows that the eyeball don't have so much high intelligences and also it doesn't have real life, but some people already accept the robot as a real family or real friend. So it also depends on what attitude we have towards the robots. Not only just the robot capabilities, but how we humans accept such a mechanical or androids.
Wow, that's really neat. Really cool. Of course, I let my Tamagotchi die. But I didn't have a funeral for it.
Some people also remember Tamagotchi.
Yeah.
Tamagotchi also becomes so famous in the world, and then some also people wanted to have a Tamagotchi as a
Well, let's move on to the kind of bigger issue of droid rights. You mentioned it's like, it's the restraining bolt is like a slave collar, and turning them off is essentially, knocking them unconscious. L3 from Solo, give her a big shout out. Decides, heck with this. I'm going to lead a revolution. She realizes what droids are in society, and she's not okay with it, and she's fed up, and she's ready to take on the world or the galaxy. So, what can we expect in terms of the ethics of droid rights? I mean, you talk about data and measure of man, but where are we now in that?
Well, first thing I think you have to look in universe in Star Wars. Lawyers are always trying to find the sources of law, which is law statutes or case law or authorities. So what we have, these stories in Star Wars. And yeah, in these stories, in the universe, yeah, most life forms aren't treated very well because it's not applying to the plot. Okay? They treat humans really badly, never mind droids.
Oh, yeah, there's slavery for humans too. So
Yeah.
and they have essentially the restraining bolt, inside. They blow you up if you try and escape. So
it's also what I love about 3. It's not the first time in Star Wars that the droids' rights movement appeared. So for any of you who read like the New Jedi Order books with the Hughes and Long War, for about maybe the first half of the book, there's a rumbling subplot about droids' rights because of what the Hughes and Long do to non-organic life forms, and then it just kind of disappeared as the series went on. It disappeared for a variety of reasons, but I think it's interesting they've briefly come back to the droids' rights, but not in a way that it goes anywhere. Nothing good happens for Elfrey's droid revolution, and she ends up becoming effectively the Millennium Falcon. And nothing particularly changes in regards to the droids' right movement in the New Jedi Order book. So it's interesting that it's a perpetual thing. Occasionally, it's an issue that will come up, but without any advancement or resolution.
Well, yes and no. It's a case of discrimination and bias. These droids are let into the Katina Mazas.
Yeah.
Okay. That's progress.
Wait, they're allowed in the bar and the cantina. There we go. We have progress, and we have EV-99, the most sadistic, second most sadistic droid after Chopper. Now she's serving bar and let the droids in. I think the main reason why they weren't allowed is essentially people would bring them and they're just taking up space. They're non-paying customers, or they're not even customers. They're, they're like your designated driver who doesn't even order water.
Yeah.
Oh, speaking of EV-99, we get droid tortures. Like when droids cross ethical lines.
Yes, I've been waiting for this, the extremes in behavior. So let's talk torture, then let's talk sex, okay? Because this is, if you know anything about the law, torture is a no-go area in international law in the real world, okay? It's a very, very bad thing. In law, in ethics, everywhere. It's probably the worst behavior sentience can engage in. So, this does good things. One is that we have a droid torturing another droid. So does droids have pain? Can they feel pain? And do they feel discomfort or anxiety? Are they programmed to? Like, if you're programming a droid to feel pain, what type of lunatic are you? Okay? And of course, then you have droids torturing organic life forms, like Leia in A New Hope on the Death Star. You just outsource it to a robot to conduct torture, right? But who's making the decision to actually conduct the torture? The person who is instructing the droid to conduct torture, right? It's just passing responsibility down the line.
In addition to, because you're absolutely right, in that kind of making droids do things that you wouldn't necessarily want a human to do. And as you've already talked about, torture, I'll talk about sex. In any science fiction world, particularly if it kind of has an element of dystopia, you're never more than about 3 chapters away from a sex bomb in a novel. But they do exist in Star Wars. We know they do. Certainly in the old EU, in Shadows of the Empire novel, the assassin droid Guri, Prince Izor, when we see the word for his eyes, thinks to himself about the numerous times that he's had sex with Guri. Did she consent? Can she consent? Those are not small questions in regards to conversations about sentience, both for droids and for everybody else. Speaking as a historian, trust me, there's nothing good at the end of a line that begins with, they're not sentient enough, so we don't need to worry about consent. Or in regards to anything we intend to do to them. There's nothing good down there. But also, so my favourite droids are mouse droids. I love mouse droids. How many of you have seen the mouse droid racing out there on the show floor? Is that super cool? Making droids race for organic pleasure? Because
I crashed mine so many times.
And you should be ashamed of that. Now, yes, we have horse racing and we have greyhound racing, and people who do horse racing and greyhound racing always say, the animals just love it. They'd be doing it anyway. Would those mouse droids be doing it anyway? Do mouse droids enjoy racing around tracks to do these things? That sentience and consent issue is super important in regards to what we believe, or what people in the universe believe is acceptable to make a droid do, or to do to a droid.
Wow, it's like, do mouse droids like their electronic cheese at the end of the maze?
Yeah. Do mouse droids dream of electric beeps?
I'm concerned with the Jawas being droid traffickers.
Yeah.
Should be banned in
those are some fighting words there. I'm going to stick up for Jawas. They get crapped on a lot in Star Wars. But anyway, let's talk about real life, ethics, good positive uses, negative uses of all of this kind of technology.
Well, and the first one is the use of AI to manipulate and send out disinformation to change power dynamics within elections or within society and culture. Not to be citing specific examples at this point. So there's that one. Even things like how to crack ciphers, codes, top secret stuff. You mentioned that you have adversarial countries in the world that have been spying at each other for decades and decades and decades, waiting for an opportunity to crack each other's ciphers. Terms the nuclear codes or the ability to, the physical warfare estimates, the weapons designs. That's scary. And then you bring in chemical, biological, weapons of mass destruction. It gets really, really scary when you use AI, misuse AI in terms of these things. So very, very, very quickly, so misuse is a big one, loss control, and singularity are the three lists for AI in real life.
Yeah, this is how you get Skynet, essentially, for Terminator.
So we also have a discussion with their politicians and also their researchers in the world, and their new ideas or new innovation is in their autonomous driving car. So we already have some autonomous driving cars, and then we are very serious about how well we can integrate or we can utilize it in our society. For example, that if their car is moving and then in front of it there some people just come in, and then if the car changes its directions and another person is here, what it can do? What is their responsibility for it? So then we don't have any conclusion yet. Although so many years we have been already discussing the ethical issues in the robot and human societies, but then it's really challenging. Also, even in the human-only society, there is no a clear conclusion about our ethical decisions. So I think this kind of scientific field is really help us to start thinking about our future, how we should integrate the robot in our society and how we can utilize it.
As an additional extra point, within Star Wars there are things called Gonk rock bands who create Gonk music, and they're Gonk droids, and I know they are because I reference them in my book. But should we view that music any different to the sludge that gets turned out on AI on Grok or ChatGPT? If it's created by something that is decided not to be sentient, what artistic merit does it have? But at the same time, you do have artists like Brian Eno who use procedurally generated electronic music, which is not quite human, not quite AI-like. So there are dividing lines. How far away from the supposedly sentient organic being do you have to get before art loses its artistic merit?
And we were running low on time, so I just want to remember that we love our droids in Star Wars. That we're big fans, and they bring so much joy to us. That they are awesome characters, and so be nice to droids.
Be nice to droids.
Just quickly, if you are interested in learning more about some of the people up here, this is ways you can find them. As I mentioned earlier, I host a podcast called Star Warsologies, where we talk about science and Star Wars. Most of the time, we just bring on a single guest expert and do a deep dive into how their field connects to Star Wars. We cover all sorts of sciences like archaeology, artificial intelligence, and lasers, and dance, and brewing, all kinds of things. So yeah, listen to us. Here's our QR code. We're part of the Skywalking Network. Also, I want to thank our audio techs in the back. I want to thank our volunteers. So please give them a round of applause. And finally, I want to thank our panelists for being here today for this excellent discussion. Yes. And do you guys have any final things to say?
Yeah, just very quickly, James, thank you. Thank you for bringing me and being here very well deserved. And be part of this excellent Star Wars community. So if you want to talk to me outside, I'll be outside. I can answer any questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much. It's a very nice opportunity for me to start learning the Star Wars. Thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming. I'm very tired. I've finished the Star Wars celebration. I hope you all have a lovely rest of the celebration and see you maybe in the future.